Thorgrim met a man named Starry, who was known as Starry Deathless. Now, Starry was a berserker, one of those chosen by the gods to be the fiercest in battle, and to sometimes understand things that other men did not. Starry felt certain that Thorgrim was chosen by the gods, and that the gods would not allow him to leave Ireland until such time as they were ready. Thorgrim did not believe those words at first, but every time he tried to sail from that place, he was flung back again, and soon he began to think Starry's words were true. In the spring of their 3rd year in Ireland, Thorgrim decided to sail from Wicklow and go raiding along the coast of Ireland. There he fell in with a Frisian merchant named Brunhard, who was a skilled sailor in his own right. For some time, Thorgrim pursued Brunhard in hope of capturing him and plundering his ships, but Brunhard always slipped away, which made Thorgrim very angry. At last, Thorgrim managed to trap Brunhard, but just as he did, a great storm arose, which drove Thorgrim's ships and Brunhard's ashore on a beach in Ireland, where some were badly hurt and some were wrecked. Once again, the gods had flung Thorgrim and his men back to the shores of Ireland, and left them in a very bad way. And once again Thorgrim Night Wolf vowed he would continue on, until such time as the gods allowed him to return to his home. Here is what happened. Chapter 1. Why do you not lament him, friends? His death is good cause for a general mortality. It is as a cloud reaching to the saints of heaven. Annals of Ulster. There were 2 walls encircling the monastery at Ferns. The inner one was made of stone. It was called a vallum, and it was not intended as any sort of defence, at least from an earthly threat. It was no more than 3 feet high, and it enclosed the sacred monastic buildings, the church and the scriptorium, and those somewhat less sacred but important nonetheless, the monks' cells and the abbot's house and the larger building where the cloistered nuns lived and worked. The vallum marked the edge of sanctuary. The second wall stood several hundred yards away from the vallum, and it was a more substantial affair, an earthen rampart built up to a height of 10 feet, with a palisade fence mounted on top. Between the vallum and the outer wall were located the fields that grew a portion of the food that fed the monastery, the round thatch and wattle homes of the lay people who carried on the work that the priests, monks, or nuns did not. There was a brewer and a blacksmith and several woodworkers. There were stables and a creamery. Ferns, like so many of the monasteries of Ireland, had grown to something beyond its origins as a holy site, like some oak tree that, as it grew, finds itself host of birds and squirrels and sundry insects and rabbits and badgers making their homes around its roots. And, like the oak, once it had grown sufficiently big and valuable, inevitably someone would arrive carrying an axe. The heathen Northmen had come several times. They had looted and burned and enslaved. But that had not happened for some while, and Abbot Colum, who had been overseeing the monastery for many years, and had lived there for many, many years before that, had allowed himself to hope that God had taken that cup from his hands. And perhaps he had. But Northmen were not the only threat, and now the men with axes were back. Axes and swords, shields and spears. Abbot Colum sighed. Mounted as he was on horseback, a rarity for him and thankfully so, his eyes were near level with the top of the heavy oak plank gate that closed up the eastern entrance through the outer wall. He looked at the dense wood, dark brown with the soaking rain, through a steady drip of water off the edge of the cowl he had pulled up over his head. "Dear Lord," he said, "if you could see fit to allow me to catch my death in this rain, I would look upon it as a great blessing." But he did not think the Lord would oblige that easily. He had lived through 6 decades and a smattering of years, through sundry diseases and injuries, through several sackings by the Northmen. He did not think that the rain, cold and driving as it was, would be the end of him. He nodded to the frightened-looking men standing ready to swing the big doors open. They nodded back, and one at least made the sign of the cross. Then they leaned back into the weight, and the gate swung open.